I'm Joelle Ruby Ryan. I'm a Ph.D. candidate at Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio. I will be reading a paper that kind of gives an overview of some of these issues and why we think they're so important. And then let me go ahead and read you the bio for our other panelists. Sitting next to me is Julia Serano. Julia Serano is an Oakland, California-based writer, spoken word performer, trans activist, and biologist. Julia is the author of Whipping Girl, a collection of personal essays that reveal how misogyny frames popular assumptions about femininity and shapes many of the myths and misconceptions people have about transsexual women. Her other writings have appeared in many different anthologies, and they are listed in the program. In recent years, Julia has gained notoriety in transgender, queer, and feminist circles for her unique insights into gender. She has been invited to speak about transgender and trans women's issues at numerous conferences, universities, queer women's studies, psychology, and philosophy-themed conferences, and her writings have been used as teaching materials in college-level gender studies courses across the U.S. And her paper today is going to focus on autogynephilia. And then the third panelist is Kelley Winters. Kelley Winters, Ph.D., is a writer on issues of gender diversity in public and medical policy, founder of GID Reform Advocates, which you can find on the web at www.gidreform.org, and a member of World Professional Association for Transgender Health, as well as advisory boards for the Matthew Shepard Foundation and Trans Youth Family Allies. She has presented papers on mental health policy issues to the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association, and the American Counseling Association, and has authored chapters in 2 books. And she has a new book out called Gender Madness. Hold up a copy, Kelley. You can buy it at the IFGE bookstore, and it's a wonderful collection. So I think I'll go ahead and start with my paper. My paper is called The Transgender Tipping Point. In sociology, a tipping point is when a previously rare phenomenon becomes speedily, considerably, and vividly more common. In this paper, it is my assertion that the previously rare phenomenon, which has materialized into extensive and exciting commonality, is the emergence of multiple forms of transgender advocacy, grassroots activism, political lobbying, emancipatory internet and print publishing, and speaking truth to power. In his influential 2000 book, The Tipping Point, How Little Things Can Make a Big Difference, Malcolm Gladwell describes the tipping point as the moment of critical mass, the threshold, the boiling point. Since the early to mid-1990s, there has been a formidable and unstoppable wave of committed, militant, and subversive transgender activism. Here in 2009, I believe we are rapidly approaching a revolutionary threshold from which no malevolent entity can force us backwards. However, it is a tipping point that will require continued vigilance, action, perseverance, and courage to fully reach. For although we have come far, there are many forces which continually threaten to halt our steps towards liberation. Sadly, many of these agents of regression are located in psychology and academia, which is what we're talking about today. And they are made even more insidious by the fact that many of them claim to be our allies rather than to identify themselves as our adversaries. In the text that follows, I would like to explore some of these agents of what I call transphobic backlash, and then discuss ways for us to continue our pushback that will help to promote our victory. So let me just begin with a little bit of context of why we put this panel together. In many ways, this panel is a follow-up session to a program that we put on at the National Women's Studies Association Conference, which was held in Cincinnati in June 2008. That session was entitled The Bailey Brouhaha, Community Members Speak Out on Resisting Transphobia and Sexism in Academia and Beyond. When I forwarded the call for proposals for this session to a popular women's studies listserv called WimStill, I was viciously attacked by senior scholar Alice Drager for simply trying to cajole people to submit abstracts for my panel. Established in 1991, WimStill has close to 5,000 subscribers from nations all over the world including many prominent senior faculty and program administrators. My CFP deals with the populist and scholarly responses to J. Michael Bailey's notorious 2000 screed, The Man Who Would Be Queen, as well as Alice Drager's subsequent lengthy scholarly history about the debacle. 2 days after my initial post, Drager proceeded to attack my CFP on Wimstill. I was taken aback by this, as I did not know she was on the list and had never seen her post before. She said that my CFP was laden with factual errors and misrepresentations about the history of the Bailey controversy and my work. She then had an exchange with another list member in which she wrote, "I also appreciate your advising Joelle Ruby Ryan that she was putting herself at risk as a scholar working within a controversial field, trans issues, by tolerating tactics that breed fear and stifle academic freedom. I would add that one is not acting like a scholar when one repeatedly misrepresents facts in the works of other scholars, as Ms. Ryan did in her CFP. I'm a graduate student as well as an out and politically active transgender woman from a non-elite academic institution. I'm currently on the job market attempting to secure an academic position, preferably in the field of women's and gender studies. This public trashing by a senior scholar with a recently awarded Guggenheim and a prestigious appointment at Northwestern University clearly indicates the level of Dr. Drager's vituperative and spiteful agenda. While I certainly knew I was stepping into a controversial arena by proposing this panel, I genuinely did not expect that my CFP would receive such ad hominem attacks by Drager, nor that I would be warned by Drager and others about my proposed scholarship and told that I was not, quote, acting like a scholar because of my opposition to her one-sided hatchet job. Apparently, acting uppity has very real consequences in the world of academia. After this prominent attack, I was fearful and considered withdrawing my CFP and not going forward with the panel. One of the things which helped me tremendously was when I contacted Lynn Conway, Professor Emerita from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, who encouraged me to move forward with the panel and even signed on as a session advisor. The panel went on as planned, and you can read and view it online thanks to the work of Conway and panelist Andrea James. In many ways, really, the J. Michael Bailey controversy that spawned this was dead in the water. Our side pretty much won until the appearance of Alice Drager's politically reactionary piece in the Archives of Sexual Behavior, in which she essentially exonerates Bailey and castigates witch-like trans women for their brutal attempts to defame a scientist and ruin a man's life. Since the appearance of that so-called scholarly history, we have literally been playing a game of 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. It is beyond egregious that Alice Drager would seize on this reprehensible man and his even more abominable book to propel her career to the next level. But she also trashed transgender academics such as myself in the process, who dared to challenge her bigoted ideas and who dared to assert that we are much more well suited to speak about our own lives than she is, a cissexual, heterosexual, white, economically privileged woman who is married to a male physician. Sadly, this behavior is not new and simply represents the latest example of imperialist indignity that the transgender community must suffer through in our quest towards liberation. When I was studying for my first master's degree, a colleague once took me aside to tell me some important information. She told me that she thought it was not a good idea for me to go forward with additional study at the doctoral level. She stated that it would be a waste of time and money because no academic institution would ever hire me for a tenure-track position because I was simply beyond the pale as a progressive, very out, 6'6" transgender woman. At the time, I was angered at her for what I saw as her transphobic attitude and stereotyping of what transgender people could aspire to. Now, nearly a decade later, I am struck by her words because they contain, I think, a certain level of truthfulness. Whether she personally thought trans women should become professors or not is not the point. The point I have come to see is whether they could become professors. Many of the trans people I know of in academia transitioned after they were awarded tenure. I have been out as a trans woman since my freshman year at the University of New Hampshire in 1993. I'm part of a new wave of out trans scholars, and the verdict is still out about the kind of treatment we will receive in the highest levels of the academic ladder. So how is this related to Draeger, Bailey, Zucker, Blanchard, and others, you might ask? The transgender liberation activists I started this paper with have been actively engaged in the process of decolonization. For many decades in the US, transgender people have been colonized as a people. We've been colonized by those with fancy degrees after their names, like psychologists, psychiatrists, medical doctors, social workers, lawyers, academicians, sociologists, anthropologists, and others. Cis-sexual experts treated trans people like their subordinates, as objects who needed to be controlled, monitored, and even rendered subhuman. This tradition of paternalism made trans people into butterflies pinned to a corkboard. We were rendered motionless and voiceless by the weight of a colonizing body of people who wanted to figure out why we were transsexual and what to do about it. According to Ray Blanchard and Michael Bailey, we are transsexual because of sex, sex, and sex. We can be neatly divided into two groups: homosexual transsexuals and autogynephilics. In other words, we are either very feminine biological males who desire constant sex with masculine straight guys, so we transition and get SRS in order to be constantly fucked bimbos, or we are more masculine biological males attracted to women who get off on cross-dressing and masturbate to fantasies of becoming women, obtain SRS for an ultimate orgasm of bodily transformation into sexy girls, becoming the very object of our obsessive fetish. So there you have it in a nutshell. This transphobic, misogynistic, and heterosexist taxonomy would be laughable were it not for the power of those who subscribe to it and disseminate it. Meanwhile, Kenneth Zucker, one of the top gurus in the incredibly conservative clique of so-called GID experts at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto, Canada, continues to expound the theory that gender-variant kids can be treated with psychological therapies which attempt to transform them into proper gender-normative subjects. This therapy, which we call transrepretism, is appalling, abusive, and destructive. I was a gender-variant youth who was constantly bombarded by my peers, my school, and even my own parents in an attempt to stop my sissified ways and make me toe the line of gender role conformity. I struggled early on with depression and even considered suicide as a way out. I truly believe that if I had been sent off to a Zuckerian-type therapist, I might have moved from thinking about suicide to attempting or even completing it. The harm from these transreparative therapies has been extensive, although many of the stories have not yet even come to light. But what does the American Psychiatric Association do to chastise Zucker's heartless and unethical behavior? In 2008, they reward him by making him chair of the American Psychiatric Association work group on sexual and gender identity disorders for the 2012 edition of the DSM-5. Just for good measure, they also appoint Zucker's crony Ray Blanchard to the working group, helping to optimize the chance that GID still will not be taken out of the DSM and transgender people will suffer for many more years, being seen as deviant, sick, deranged, disordered, and pathological. Although cissexual people continue to be the primary instigators of transgender repression and degradation, it is not always that clear-cut. Trans and intersex-identified people like Ann Lawrence, Willow Arun, Kira Tree, Hannes Farmer, Rosalie Kleneski, and others have stepped forward to defend people like Bailey, Draeger, Blanchard, etc. While maddening, this assorted group of delusional people does not in any way surprise me. Even in the face of colonization, there have always been people who have worked to support the mission of the colonizer. These self-hating step-and-fetch-it clowns are a great boon for their oppressor, because said oppressor can always harvest these people's collaboration with evil to legitimate their own imperialist projects. It saddens me to see the way people from my own minority group have so internalized the terms of their ruling oppressors that they replicate these ideologies and prop up bigotry in order to obtain scraps of attention from those who have so brutally colonized them. Don't they know they are simply being used? Don't they know they are legitimating projects which perpetuate not only their own oppression, but the oppression of their fellow trans community members? The false consciousness of these people simply highlights the need for people to not only decolonize their lives, bodies, and identities, but also the urgency of thoroughly decolonizing their minds. This is one of the many reasons why the BBL ideology, the GID diagnosis, and the trans reparative therapy are so alarming and crucial to interrogate. They encourage trans people to think of ourselves as crazy, disordered, abnormal, and bizarre. In actuality, gender variance is as benign a characteristic as handedness or eye color. It has always been with us and always will be, but so-called experts have taken it on themselves to appropriate our lives to serve their own ideological ends and have done a huge amount of damage in the process. We are fighting for our lives in so many urgent and basic ways, and these privileged academics and scientists work around the clock to make our lives harder and our futures bleaker, all the while claiming that they are our friends and allies and that they care about furthering understanding and tolerance. Although I painted a somewhat bleak future, I am actually very optimistic, which is why I call this the transgender tipping point. And it is because, although these actions are destructive, they have not been met lying down. The whirlwind of transgender activism, resistance, and a renewed sense of agency and empowerment is exactly what has stemmed the tide of transphobia and will continue to do so. Malcolm Gladwell identifies 3 types of people who are critical to the success of reaching a tipping point: connectors, mavens, and salespeople. Connectors are people who have a knack for bringing people together, folks who have a ton of friends and acquaintances, and are able to use this extended social network for social good. There's a lot of connectors at this conference. Mavens are individuals who have a special talent for sharing information, what one can call information specialists. Gladwell writes that mavens are really information brokers, sharing and trading what they know. Mavens help to construct informational clearinghouses to disseminate information and help educate the masses. Salespeople are, in a word, persuaders. They're able to take the information and make a successful pitch, not only through carefully chosen words, but through nonverbal communication such as body language. Salespeople tend to be charismatic people who are able to seal the deal. Gladwell also discusses the stickiness factor, the specific content of a message that makes an idea stick, and the power of context, the nature of the time and place in which change occurs. I have no doubt that we have an abundance of all 3 types of people in our trans community because I've seen their work in action. And there's so many people: Lynn, Conway, Andrea James, Julia Serano, Kelley Winters, Ethan St. Pierre, Vanessa Edwards Foster, Joan Roughgarden, Ben Barris, Deidre McCloskey, and many, many more wonderful allies and other trans activists and advocates. One of the things which is helping us to win the fight is the internet and the development of do-it-yourself media technologies. We can create messages that contain the much-needed stickiness factor, and we can help create cultural context that favors the type of change we so yearn for. A great recent example of this world coming to pass is the recent viewpoint issued by Council of Europe Human Rights Commissioner Thomas Hammerberg, who issued a statement in which he very, very strongly supported the rights of transgender people, and that was a wonderful sign of progress. Despite legal and political victories and greater attention to transgender human rights, one would think that psychology, and especially psychiatry, are largely caught in the dark ages. Their unwillingness to change and to answer their critics is proof of their desire to cling to power, even if it means upholding an increasingly irrelevant status quo paradigm. To these oppressive experts, I would like to say the writing is on the wall. Your white-knuckling and increasingly venomous backlash are not going to be able to stem the tide of positive socio-cultural transformation. I do believe we are in the midst of a paradigm shift that is incredibly momentous. Also, the gaze is shifting. Whereas once transgender people were studied, pathologized, and analyzed by so-called experts, now we are turning the lens back onto them and analyzing those who have analyzed us for so long. And we are stating unequivocally that unless there is some kind of reciprocal relationship between researcher and research subject, we refuse to humor you anymore. Transgender people continue to be an emergent people, even in the face of dogmatic reactionary psychiatric discourses. We refuse to be relegated to the shadowy underworld of prostitution, smoky drag bars, and Jerry Springer episodes that so much of a dominant society would like to assign us to. And sadly, last night was a great example of a film which really furthered so many stereotypes about our lives that, is very problematic. We demand that we are the best experts on our own lives and experiences, and we deserve a place at the table for any policy decision which involves our lives. As the disability rights movement has often said, nothing about us without us. And as we gain more cultural and intellectual capital, there are more and more of us with the same fancy titles and numerous letters after our names as the experts who still attempt to colonize our lives. Alice Drager, Michael Bailey, Kenneth Zucker, Ray Blanchard, and so forth, you do not speak for me, nor do you speak for the vast majority of transgender and intersex people that I know and love. Furthermore, I'm not sure that you understand that you're making it harder for people like me to navigate the world through the work you are doing. Whether it is cruelly trashing my work in front of my peers, insisting that I'm disordered, or that my life is based on a sexual fetish, rather than enlarge what is possible for the community, you straitjacket us and constrain our movement forward. At the aforementioned NWSA conference, Alice Drager gave a paper in which she referred to my mentor Lynn Conway as an intellectual terrorist. She also mocked Lynn's website, a place that has given hope and inspiration to many thousands of trans people from all over the world. While Drager and Bailey constantly foam at the mouth about academic freedom and refer to the campaign to expose the man who would be clean as academic McCarthyism, they have remarkably little patience or interest in academic freedom for anyone who dares to question their dogmatic views. Elise Hendrick terms this Bailey Drager academic freedom and notes, Bailey Drager academic freedom accords heightened protection to their right as academics to engage in whatever conduct they wish, while prohibiting any criticism of that conduct by anyone else. This includes not being able to criticize Drager for the instrumental role she played in attempting to replace the term intersex with the pathologizing language of disorders of sex development, which has enraged many members of both the trans and intersex communities and has been written about extensively by Organization International Intersex founder Curtis Hinkle. Hinkle recently emailed me to alert that the APA pamphlets on intersexuality and transgenderism are authored by Ann Lawrence and Ken Zucker, among others, hardly the people I want to be teaching psychologists and others about sex and gender diversity. A great example of the misinformation promulgated by the pamphlets is the following. Many experts and persons with intersex conditions have recently recommended adopting the term disorders of sex development. They feel that this term is more accurate and less stigmatizing than the term intersex. The transgender pamphlet's bibliography is filled with references for Bailey, Blanchard, Lawrence, Green, and Zucker, but not for those who interrogate their discourse of pathology and disorder. James Cantor, a sexologist from the CAMH clique, apparently spent a great deal of time trolling on Wikipedia. He is, it seems to me, obsessed with trying to spin every entry that concerns transgender people and especially theories of trans etiology to conform to Blancharddian and Zuckerian ideology. He even spends time trolling on Lynn Conway's biography page to overstate the importance of the Bailey controversy in the face of Conway's many and varied life accomplishments, and to demonize her for trying to expose Bailey's specious book. Not content to only focus on the virtual realm, Cantor also attacked a workshop on trans issues conducted by Kyle Scanlon, trans program coordinator at the 519 Church Street Community Center in Toronto. And this story, unfortunately, is not going to be over anytime soon. Just before we left to come to this conference, Lynn Conway received a letter from an attorney representing Kenneth Zucker. The attorney made allegations about some of the content on Conway's website and stated that it was defamatory to the work and character of Zucker. Zucker's attorney also sent this letter to the University of Michigan, where Conway is professor emerita and who provides the bandwidth for her site. This charge of defamation is specious and easily proven false by Conway. In fact, I believe strongly that this represents an attack on Conway's freedom of speech and is truly about the fact that Conway publishes unflattering information about Zucker and his cronies at CAMH and works to expose his trans reparative therapies and involvement with the continuing pathologization of transgender people via his hegemonic position of influence in the APA. This time marks the 5th anniversary of the first all-transgender production of the Vagina Monologues, which was staged in Los Angeles. This historic event was captured in the documentary film production entitled Beautiful Daughters. I've seen Beautiful Daughters several times and it never fails to bring tears to my eyes. The production was truly a touchstone in promoting the liberation of transgender women, serving to interrogate and tear apart the many negative stereotypes that continue to be thrust upon us in the society. When I think about Michael Bailey's book, one of the first things I think about is his stunning quotation that we are especially well suited to prostitution. Bailey, using the legitimacy of so-called science, reproduces cultural ideals which sexualize the trans woman and perpetuate the mythological she-male slut turned out in countless pornographic movies. I have been on many panels in classes over the past 15 years, and have often heard students repeat this notion. I didn't know you guys were professors and doctors and lawyers and other professionals. I thought you either did hair, worked as drag acts, or in the adult entertainment industry. Thank you, Mike Bailey, for using your education and position of influence as a professor and researcher to degrade, defame, and misrepresent our incredibly diverse lives. Another thing I've heard frequently over the years from students: wow, when I heard the topic was transgender, I expected some psychologist or social worker person to come in. I didn't expect the speaker to be trans themselves. Once again, our lives have been so thoroughly colonized for so long that students do not even expect that we might be able and willing to speak our own truths. Rather, they expect that cis-sexual experts will speak on our behalf. The attack I suffered from Alice Drager that I began this essay with is significant in relation to this point. Transgender has slowly become a much more popular and openly discussed topic in college-level classrooms. Not only in women's and gender studies classrooms, but in sociology, psychology, social work, nursing, English lit, and many other traditional and interdisciplinary academic fields of inquiry. But how many trans professors or even trans guest speakers or guest lecturers are covering these trans topics? I've seen time and again how many cissexual people do not want to let go of their assumed mastery over these subjects and subjectivities. Julia Serano, Susan Stryker, and others have commented upon how badly we need to see more trans professors in these classrooms commenting on our own lives and research. Beautiful Daughters is an example of a cultural production that was able to disrupt hegemonic patterns of looking at transgender women, but it is only the tip of the iceberg. Several years back, there was talk of a transgender march on Washington, but it never materialized. Imagine, if you will, if tens of thousands of trans people, family members, partners, allies, and activists were able to descend on our nation's capital and display ourselves in all of our glorious diversity, from professors to police officers, from mechanics to sex workers, from retail clerks to astronauts, every age, race, ethnicity, sexuality, disability, mothers, fathers, daughters, sons, grandkids, nieces, nephews. We still have yet to be seen, I believe, in all our true splendor, and one in the front to the Dragers, Baileys, and Zuckers to see us out, speaking truth to power, saying we are not your disordered, pathologized, sexualized, fetishized, circus sideshows freaks anymore. The gig is up. Despite these and other challenges, we are a watershed moment in history, and we are throwing off the yokes of pathology, criminality, and deviance to demand dignity and respect. There are many wonderful helping professionals who reject paternalistic control and instead see themselves as professionals and as allies to help us on our journeys towards personal success and joy. Those who cling to power, to old ideologies, and to offensive paradigms are fighting back so hard because they know it is only a matter of time until their legacies will be toast. The will of the people can never be stopped, and with all our mavens, connectors, and salespeople, we are truly a formidable force for cultural change. In climatology, the tipping point is the point at which change due to human activity brings about sufficient new processes in nature to make any human reversal of that change impossible. I have great confidence that our efforts are so crucial and colossal that we will render it impossible for our adversaries to reverse the direction of our socio-cultural transformations. As the great Reverend Martin Luther King said, unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word. As we speak our truths, we must remember to love ourselves and our community members and hold fast to the strengths of our convictions. In the final analysis, we stand on the right side of history, just as all freedom fighters and change agents do. And although our colonizers attempt to defame our names and ridicule our heroic efforts, we are filled with an indomitable spirit that will see us through to the tipping point, a transgender tipping point that will make all our detractors fall like dominoes and lead to a genuine, lasting state of freedom, justice, and liberation. So that's my paper, and I hope that gives a context for where we're coming from with some of these people. So thank you.